Okay, chapter 5, tells us a little bit about states and government. And I think at this point in your academic career, you have a good basic understanding, or at least you should. If you don't, then read the chapter about what creates a state and what is the government all about. So I took some of the PowerPoints, there are many more, but I just took some of the formation of state in terms of history. And you can see that they've really divided since the last 300 years or so. So in 1800, there were about 20 number of states. And what we mean by states, it's not like Georgia and Maine and California. We're talking about countries here, nations. So they call nation states. But you can see that they've grown. And by 2010, we have around 190 nations in this world. And most of them are in the United Nations. But this is just, I like graphs, and this just tells you the development. And you can see right about here is World War II, and after World War II, it really rises because these countries were separated. And they were separated, if you can look at the video that's attached that I recommended, it's done by after World War One and World War II. States were divided, and especially in Africa, when the colonizations were stopped and the countries developed their own identity. So these are just some of the terms. You don't memorize these terms at all, but there's a political system that's obvious. If you think of the United States, that's obvious that we have a political system. Two major parties are involved. Democracy is what we purport to be. That's when all qualified citizens of a state have a say in the way the country is governed. Democratization, that means that we tried that when we go invade another country, such as Iraq in the early part of the 21st century, and try to build institutions to become stable democracies. Some people would say keep out of other people's business. Authoritarian system is when its power is concentrated at the top. You could think of countries such as North Korea, China, and Russia. And so you can see the democracy, full democracy, are in dark green. Look at this up here, Canada. But look at flawed democracy. This is as of 2016, so it's before the previous administration. Look at these. These are flawed democracies. The strong ones are Canada. This is Australia. We have part of Norway, Sweden, Great Britain, Germany, and Spain. Okay, then we have a hybrid. These are countries in Africa here, Madagascar, and then we have some authoritarian, like I mentioned, is Russia and China, and then North Korea. So these are just an idea of the democracies in this country. Flawed, most of it South America and North America. Thought you might find that interesting. The differences between democracies and authoritarian systems, I think this is pretty evident. It just will give you an idea. As you're picking out your topic, you may, in terms of globalization, should we be involved in authoritarian system to try to democratize them? And what does that do for us? So you can see the differences here. And again, as I mentioned in the previous part of this video, you can go and look at the entire set of PowerPoint slides and look at this for a longer time. But I think it just compares democracies and authoritarian systems all the way up to. This is one kind of interesting one for me, is that the media is diverse and independent, and it's limited in control. And sometimes you would think that's what the previous administration tried to do. You may agree or not, but when you talk about fake news, you're sort of limiting the diverse and independent media. So, challenges to the state security: a state that follows the activities of its citizens through closed circuit television. And this has been and so on. And these have been something that the more left wing liberal and ACLU would say that we're becoming more of a closed state where people are monitoring us. So that's something that the challenges to the state. So that's chapter 5, real short. I think the video that I recommended is something that you should look at. It will give you a better idea. Now I'm going to go to chapter 6. So the law and international organizations, there's a lot of stuff in this chapter, And if you are interested in that, great. You can read the chapter, look at this video, but look at this part of the video. But you can also look at the video and the article that I recommended in this week's assignment. The big one is United Nations, and that picture right here that you see is the United Nations building in New York City. There's global governance. Again, these slides are available on Brightspace, and you can just stare at them for as long as you want. I'm going to go quickly, but these are types of the anarchy. State when against government, there's nothing happening. Governance is what we have here. Global governance would be when you listen to the United Nations, for instance, or the European Union is another global governance. So, and institutions and regime. So you can look at the difference there. International law, we have a lot of international laws that we follow as a country and as a world, and treaties. These are just pacts among states or between states, depending on what the issue is. So I just wanted to put up this chart to show that things have really changed since 1864. So during this time, there was, of course, the American Civil War. There was also the Crimean War in Europe. You could say it's sort of a European World War -1. But this is something that's really in our modern era. It's considered in our modern era. So they started taking stock of what is the treatment of prisoners, civilians, and the sick. Not all of these treaties are held, as you can tell by those of you that follow in World War II with the Holocaust. But there have been a lot of other treaties signed, and there are even treaties. This is, for instance, 2003, protection from tobacco consumption, exposure to tobacco smoke. Recently, the new administration has returned to the Paris Agreement about climate change, and we had gotten out of it in the previous administration. So this administration, that's another agreement, and so on. So international treaties, you could say that this is how it's done. It's pretty self-evident. You look at the problem, you get together and negotiate, you sign, and this is the big part here is ratification. So let's say we go to Paris and we sign a climate, and then we come back and the Senate doesn't agree to it. It's not ratified. So it doesn't mean anything, even though we went there and signed and had a nice little party to show that we were signing this treaty or this pact. So then it's like, how do you enforce it? So there's a Paris Agreement. How do you enforce it? Who is the police, if you'd say, of making sure that the governments of these countries follow the rules of that particular treaty? And it's usually the United Nations. So these are some of the programs of the United Nations, and if you were a kid, I don't know if they have it. No, they don't have it here. If you're a kid that Halloween time, you trick or treat for UNICEF. That was a branch of the United Nations, United Children's Fund, and so and for just for argument's sake, UNESCO, which is Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, it may seem very benign, but it's a very controversial subject in the United States. And a little big part of it is globalization. How do we determine our own educational, scientific, and culture when it's brought over to the whole country? So we've defunded this at certain times. So that's something you may want to look at. Um, the pros and cons of United Nations. This is an important slide. If you're looking at the slide, so go in Brightspace, look at Chapter 6 PowerPoint, and you can just stare at this for a long time. But here's the thing about the United Nations. There's no powers of enforcement. The United Nations will go into a country that's probably civil war to police things, but its intent is not to get involved directly in the war. The United Nations was there during the Korean War, um, and you can see that it didn't help to stop the war because they weren't battling in themselves. Um, and then I thought this was kind of interesting. Multinationals; these are outside of of the nation. These are more private firms. You can see that Walmart is the biggest multinational in the world, and its revenue is $485 billion, and it goes all the way down to oil. So we have technology, a lot of vehicles, energy. These are the sectors, and it's kind of interesting. So when you're formulating your thesis, this may be something you want to think about is the power that comes with being a large multinational. And so we continue with some of the examples of regional integration. This is just to give you an idea that the European Union began in 1952, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations 67, going down here, Union of South American Nations, so 2011. So you can go crazy trying to figure out which is which. I could not give this to you and my own. I could not. The African Union is important. That's 55. Every African state is in there. So that's important. But who is in it? You don't have to memorize that. Just look it up if you need to use it for your paper. So that's, again, the video for this week. It's kind of long, but this is what is due for next week. So make sure that you get that and then go to the resources for this first module. You're setting your things on paper and you're going to write it and put it into the discussion post number 3. I hope if you have any questions, you will let me know. Take care and have a good week.